Welcome back to the deep dive. We hear about Moody's all the time, right? Credit ratings, the economy, all that. But what are they really up to these days? We've been digging through their annual reports, 2020 to 2023, and let me tell you, it's way more interesting than you might think.
Yeah, they've been dropping these hints, kind of like a trail of breadcrumbs. Like throughout these reports, there's this recurring theme, right? They keep talking about moving beyond just being a credit rating agency. They want to be a global integrated risk assessment firm.
Okay, I got to be honest, that sounds a little, I don't know, corporate jargony?
Yeah.
What does that actually look like? Are they ditching credit ratings altogether?
Not exactly, but it's a smart move. Think about it. We live in a world overflowing with data. Everyone's worried about risk, but just knowing about it isn't enough anymore.
You got to know how to handle it.
Exactly. Businesses need tools to understand and manage that risk. That's where Moody's Analytics comes in.
Right, their data and analytics arm.
Yeah, MA. And the reports really highlight how important MA is becoming to them. For instance, in 2021, their employee base in MA grew by like 30% compared to the previous year. Meanwhile, their traditional credit rating business, MIS, only saw about 5% growth. That's a pretty stark difference.
So reading between the lines, it's all about the data.
Absolutely. And they're not just sitting around waiting for the data to come to them. They're going out and getting it. They've been on this acquisition spree, snapping up all these companies that specialize in different areas of data and analytics.
It's like they're building a risk assessment empire, one acquisition at a time. Can you give us some examples?
Sure, like remember when they bought Rees a few years back? Rees is all about commercial real estate data. Huge market. And that was just the start. Then they got Catalyst, another big name in commercial real estate data. And then they dove headfirst into regulatory tech, buying companies like Regulatory Data Corp and Passport, which focus on anti-money laundering and know your customer stuff.
Wow, it's a lot to keep track of. It sounds like they're casting a really wide net. So who are they targeting with all this? Is it still just those big financial institutions, or are they going after a broader audience now?
They're definitely thinking bigger. They want to be the go-to source for risk assessment, not just for banks and investors, but for corporations, maybe in governments, anyone who needs to understand and manage risk in today's world, basically.
It's kind of amazing, right? I mean, you don't always think of a company like Moody's as being on the cutting edge, but they're making some big moves. And you know what else I found interesting? It's like between the lines of all this financial talk, you get these little glimpses into their company culture.
Yeah, like these reports aren't just about numbers and charts, they actually reveal something about Moody's values.
Exactly. For example, diversity and inclusion. You wouldn't necessarily put those two things together.
Yeah.
A company like Moody's, with its long history and then like being a leader in diversity, but they talk about it a lot.
It's true, and it's not just lip service either. They're putting some real teeth behind it. Like, they've linked how they hold their leaders accountable for diversity to their executive compensation.
Seriously. Wow. That's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, it shows they're serious about making some real changes within the company. And it's not just, be more diverse. It's very specific. If you look at their 2020 report, they actually set these targets for increasing representation of women and ethnic groups, especially in leadership roles.
So they're actually tracking their progress and holding themselves accountable. I like it.
It's pretty impressive. And I mean, part of it is probably just good business sense, right? They're trying to attract top talent, and in fields like data analytics, diversity is key.
Right. The more diverse your team is, the better ideas you're going to get. Makes sense. Okay, so we've got Moody's expanding their empire, diving deep into data, and now they're all about diversity and inclusion. That sounds almost too good to be true. What about the challenges? There's always a catch, right? Like they can't just be killing it across the board. What did the reports say about the challenges they're facing?
Well, they definitely acknowledge that there are some big ones. One that jumps out is litigation.
Makes sense, right? They're making judgments about risk. What happens when those judgments are wrong?
Exactly. It's like if things go south in the economy or the markets take a nosedive, suddenly everyone's looking for someone to blame. And Moody's, with their whole risk assessment thing, they're kind of a prime target.
Right, so more risk for others could mean more risk for them, too. And speaking of risk, their 2021 report specifically mentioned the whole ESG thing. Like, that's a potential landmine for litigation.
Oh, yeah, ESG is a big one. Environmental, social, governance factors, it's still a pretty new area, and the rules are kind of being written as we go.
So what does it mean for Moody's?
Well, they're trying to figure it out, just like everyone else, but their ESG assessments, they carry a lot of weight, so they have to be really careful. One wrong move, and they could end up in court.
It's a high-stakes game, for sure. And then on top of all that, there's the whole geopolitical landscape, right? Like, the world is a pretty volatile place these days.
Absolutely. And those global events, they can really shake things up. The 2022 and 2023 reports actually talk about how they've had to adapt to some of that, specifically the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict. They had to completely shut down their operations in Russia, pull their credit ratings, and then, of course, there's the ripple effects on the global markets, which they have to navigate too.
So we've got these huge global trends, this constantly evolving regulatory landscape, and then all the everyday challenges of running a business. It makes you wonder how they keep up.
Well, that's the thing, right? Moody's, they're not just sitting back and waiting to see what happens. They're trying to get ahead of it. They're making these strategic moves, expanding into new areas, and really trying to position themselves as the go-to source for risk assessment in a world that just keeps getting riskier.
That's a really good way to put it. It's like they're not just trying to survive, they're trying to thrive in this environment of constant change.
Exactly. But it does make you think, with that much data, that much influence, what kind of responsibility comes with that? It'll be really interesting to see how they handle that in the years to come.
It's a big question, and it's one we're all going to have to grapple with as data becomes even more central to our lives. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Moody's. It's been fascinating to peel back the layers and see what they're really all about. Until next time, keep exploring.